Hi, everyone. Good to see some familiar faces from yesterday and from last time. Those of you that attended the October PharmaCX event hopefully remember some of what I presented. If you do not remember a whole lot, I do hope you remember this particular slide. If you weren't at last year's event, this is not today's lunch menu, just to clarify. This is how we see the difference between KOL, influencer marketing, and influencer advocacy. Just like the difference between a fast food meal and a nourishing homemade meal, which is essentially they both satisfy your hunger. But with fast food meal, you have a lot less control over the ingredients, over the cooking process, and you certainly understand that in the long run, it's not really that beneficial for your overall health. With advocacy, which is more like a homemade, nourishing meal, you have a lot more control over the cooking process. You have a lot more control over the ingredients. Yes, it does take time, but it is also so much better for you in the long run. Now, what is the main difference between marketing and advocacy? Just like the difference between a fast food meal and a homemade meal, they both give you visibility. But with marketing, you pay the influencer or the KOL to mention your brand, your product, your service. It's very transactional. Whereas in influencer advocacy, you invest your precious time and resources. You have to be a lot more deliberate about what you're trying to get out of that relationship. And you have to put a lot more thought into the types of actions that you take in order to build that relationship. It doesn't matter if this is a relationship that you're building with an advocate or your significant other, your child, your spouse, your partner, etc. You do have to invest resources. Advocacy is much harder to achieve because it cannot be bought. But in the long run, it's more credible, it's more persuasive, it builds trust between you and your key customers and stakeholder groups, and most importantly, it builds a network of deep partnerships with people that advocate on your behalf. When I spoke last time, I talked about the advocacy framework and the three key elements that are important in order to set up this advocacy framework. So one, you need a reliable methodology in order to rank, identify, and put these KOLs, whether they're HCPs or patient advocates or scientific community, they have to be relevant for you and your business in the right context. Number two, and we talked a lot about, we're not just talking about HCPs, we're not just talking about patients, we're not just talking about journalists, we're talking about the entire ecosystem of people that matter for your brand and your product and your service. And then finally, personalized engagement recommendations. Now, I know there was a little bit of back and forth on this yesterday for those of you who were here, whether personalization is worth the effort. And in this particular case, I'm referring to AI-driven recommendations, which saves a lot of time and a lot of resource on your end. So when I presented this framework, I got a number of questions, and I decided to answer the first and the easiest question, which was, does this framework only apply to corporate communications? Because that's what we talked about, and that's what we're going to discuss today. The answer is no. It applies to medical affairs, to omnichannel, to marketing. It's about building relationships. So if you're in the business of building relationships, the model applies. I also received a number of questions related to where does the program start? What does success look like? How do we measure? And so my guest today is Megan Ostrower. And as Simon mentioned, Megan is with Takeda. She's head of global external communications at Takeda. She's been with Takeda for 3.5 years, in healthcare for 10 years. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Megan. She and her small team, and it is really a small team, are spearheading a number of global initiatives across all of Takeda, with advocacy being one of them, fighting a lot of uphill battles but staying true to the course in order to build this or foster these deep partnerships and build an influential network of people who advocate on their behalf. Thank you so much for being here, Megan, again. So I'm going to sit down now. This is a little bit of an awkward setup, but we'll go with it. So let's get started.
Let's get started. Thank you for that intro, Lusine.
Did I miss anything?
No, it was great. Couldn't have done better myself.
Okay, good. So the first question is, why and how did you decide to start this advocacy journey? It wasn't an easy one. It still isn't. So, but can you please tell us a little bit more about where you started and where you're going with it?
Yeah, definitely. And journey is definitely the right word to use when thinking about our advocacy program. And thank you for being part of our advocacy journey. So we've done a lot of research over the years to really think about where Takeda is showing up from a reputational perspective and where we want to evolve to. Takeda, if you're not familiar, I think most of you are, but is headquartered in Tokyo. We have a large presence in the US, but from a reputational perspective, we're not as known as we'd like to be. So raising our awareness and familiarity was a big focus for us, and then zeroing in on the stakeholders that we and my team care most about along the lines of policy elites, prospective talent, that scientific community at large, was really kind of the baseline for how we set up the foundation of the program. I'd say there's probably three kind of areas of focus that got us started. One was just simply trying and getting started. We did a lot of work to interview internal stakeholders, really identify where existing relationships started, because our program is all earned influencers. I think many are familiar with paid influencer programs, but this is really focused on earned relationships and continuing to build those relationships. From there, we really narrowed down to what geographies do we care about? You know, who are those key stakeholders? Because Takeda has a big presence in Massachusetts, we started there. We started to focus on 17 priority influencers that allowed us to really prioritize our focus and bring internal stakeholders along. I think somebody mentioned in the last session that bringing your teams along with you on this journey takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and just a lot of a consistent approach to remind them that this is important and why it's important and how it will help move the needle for reputation, which is ultimately our goal.
Yep. And so you mentioned that you start with geography, which makes a lot of sense. But beyond these local influencers, I know that you're also actively participate in a number of events, as do many companies here. What is your strategy of relationship building at these events? We all know we're all at an event ourselves, and we all know that it's not an easy task, whether you're attending as an attendee or a sponsor or a speaker. And what role does technology play in it when you're getting ready for these events?
Yeah, my team alone probably touches anywhere between 30 to 40 events on a yearly basis. Maybe about 10 of those really being big reputational moments for us. And I think this is where AI, Gen AI, has a huge opportunity to really cut down on a lot of those manual processes, the research processes that take so much of our time to identify who do we care about from an influencer perspective in particular. I think many people have gone through the exercise of not getting an attendee list until last minute. Executive availability is really tight at these 2 or 3 day events. So if we had a platform, what if we had a platform, which we do, that allowed us to really input these attendee lists and quickly identify who are the most influential, not only on their own right, but also overlaying that with what we care about from a Takeda perspective. So the work that we're doing with Lusine really helps us score the influencer to know what that level of influence is. I think the other thing that's been really exciting to see, and many are familiar with Gen AI and ChatGPT, but being able to quickly summarize what those influencers are talking about, what they care about. The other piece that I think has been really interesting too is seeing that influencers, their sphere of influence, who are the folks that they're engaging with, that just allow us to continue to bridge some of those those pieces, and for our executives too, when they're going into one-on-one bilateral meetings or with media as well, being able to have those talking points and making those connections even more clearly.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about Gen AI and the role it plays, and it's still it's a big topic. Some people strongly believe in it, others think, well, it's been around for a while. But you touched upon it a little bit, and I guess my question is, what do you think is the difference between, okay, what can AI do well, and what can humans do well, especially as you're navigating this advocacy and relationship building programs?
Yeah, I think we all have to give ourselves a little grace. Tech is new, there's tons of new tools, new platforms out there. Being okay with trial and error on a lot of these new technologies. I think one thing that's been really valuable, and I don't know that it exists everywhere, is that our leadership team is very invested in bringing data and technology across the organization, but my boss in particular, a big advocate for infusing communications with AI and tech. So we've been encouraged to fail and fail fast, learn from it and pivot, which I think makes a huge difference in trying out a lot of these new things when you're also still trying to do business as usual. That said, I don't think AI can replace relationship building, which is really where the influencer work comes into play. So taking AI to really cut down on a lot of the time spent identifying who we care about and who we want to meet with, and then overlaying that with human insights, human intelligence about what matters most for some of those conversations that we want to be having.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement. I think AI just helps do things. I know yesterday we heard about efficiency versus effectiveness. I think AI is kind of about efficiency and people are about effectiveness. So it's a perfect combination. Another question that I think is on everyone's mind is, in marketing, it's much easier to, well, not much easier, let me rephrase. It's somewhat easier to measure because you put a certain amount of money, you get something in return, so there are formulas that help us calculate. Advocacy is not that easy to measure because advocacy is intangible. So how do you measure success? What are the KPIs? What are you working towards?
We've invested in a team in our Global Corporate Affairs Department. It's called Data and Analytics Insights Team, which is helping our communications organization come together around a common set of KPIs. We call them common KPIs. We have probably about 200 communicators across the organization, and you can imagine in a company that has a bunch of different business units and different teams, that everyone has their own little flavor of doing things. So this set of common KPIs is really meant to bring folks together on how we measure consistently. One of those KPIs is advocacy, and we define advocacy as being when a partner or a stakeholder that we're engaging with either amplifies or defends the work that Takeda is doing to their audiences. We want Takeda's name to be raised in rooms that we might not be present in, and that's a lot of the kind of underlying focus of our reputation work. For us on the external side in particular, we look at measuring face-to-face interactions, social media engagements, traditional media as really the baseline for what advocacy can look like. A huge learning over the past year. I mean, a lot of this was piloted, custom built, and we've created a tracker that we have individual relationship owners of these individual influencers that holds those team members accountable for ensuring that they're inputting both the quantitative side, but really where a lot of the influencer advocacy happens is on the qualitative side. So again, if somebody says something nice about us, that's great, we want to hear about it. But one of the learnings along the way is that not all advocacy is created equal. That said, we're very much in a stage of lots of data collection and really seeing, we might have 15 engagements with one influencer. They might not have all had a specific output, but then when we start getting invited to things that we wouldn't have previously been invited to, that's when we really start to feel advocacy taking place.
Yeah, and I think that's really what defines measurement, right? A lot of times we get so hung up on numbers and ROI, And we have a tendency to forget that at the end of the day, you have to have your business goals. And if the business goal is increased visibility, there are metrics. And I think the tracker that Megan mentioned is really incredible because a lot of time has been spent on figuring out the metrics, the right performance metrics. How do we define, social metric, an engagement versus an in-person engagement, the audience size, the potential impact. So it's an incredible effort, and I applaud you for that.
I think we might need a better name than tracker. I
Yeah,
think there's
probably
more people to use it. But with that, there's also a scoring methodology that the team has created together to really identify even those incremental moments. They matter, but then those really big moments, what that looks like, so that when we're looking back quarter over quarter or annually, we can really see where those spikes are. We've built a real-time dashboard that we've been able to just kind of go into and see at any given moment how things are progressing, and helps us understand where we should spend our time. Along the way in this process, we've taken out a few of the influencers that we thought maybe would have more of an impact than they did, and replaced them with others that we are really starting to see that traction with. Lusine, I'm curious too, you work with a lot of different companies. Where do you really see measurement in the earned influencer space taking off?
Yeah, the measurement is always the hardest piece, but I think the way that it's been done, the way that we've developed is kind of starting. A lot of companies, I think, tend to forget about what is it that we're trying to achieve, and that big picture, the measurable objectives that are quantifiable, as much as possible, of course. And then custom metrics. I really still believe in custom metrics. Some of them are universally accepted across all companies in pharma industry, and then others are customized. And I think that's what you did so well in bringing that customization while also looking at industry standards and saying what makes sense for us as a company in where we are in our journey. So I think that's exactly the right approach. Completely agree with that. And then the last question I have for you is, how has the quality of engagement between Takeda and influencers or KOLs changed now that you have this program in place, which I know is still in early stages, in baby steps, but do you see anything that has already led to improvement that you kind of take back and report to your executive teams?
Yeah, I think with anything really, the ability to prioritize and focus just allows us to think of things in a more holistic and a deeper way, and it gives us license to say no. If we're thinking about new ways to engage new influencers, if they're not really within that priority influencer realm, it helps us, again, focus. I think the interesting thing that we've really seen over the past year is that now we're not only trying to engage those individuals just on a Takeda one-way relationship, but because it's such a locally focused program, we're now seeing ways to connect those influencers with each other. And because a lot of our program is really based on community impact, that local piece is really important to making more connections. And at the end of the day, we want people to come to us and come to Takeda and say, you're a convener and you have a strong thought leadership on this topic. Let's get you involved in these conversations and have a seat at the table.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm hoping you found this helpful. I don't know if there are any questions, but
I know we're standing in the way of the biggest influencer, lunch.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm like, we need to wrap up. People are getting hungry.
Let's give Isabel. Yes.
Great presentation, both. Megan, you mentioned about connection, right? How to really make sure that all the work with advocacy really influence how the marketing activities are being done in the industry? Because I see always like a parallel world.
Yeah.
Between advocacy and marketing team, like how you see like the evolution to have this connection?
Yeah, I think we're still early stages. We're still learning. Somebody asked me earlier, patient advocacy groups, a group that we're engaging with. Right now, we're very focused on corporate engagement, so really on that academia, policy, media as an audience. I think that will evolve over time. But we also want to think about connection and engagement, not just when we need something, but also being a resource when some of our partners need us to help amplify the things that they're doing.
Wonderful. Any additional questions, comments for Lusine or Megan? No, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.